My name is Isabella Carter, and for most of my life, I believed I understood exactly who I was. I grew up in a large white house at the edge of the city, surrounded by polished floors, tall windows, and carefully arranged silence. My father was a well-known businessman, respected and admired. My mother was elegant, distant, and always perfectly dressed. Everything in my childhood looked complete from the outside. Nothing seemed missing. There was always someone else in the house, too. Her name was Maria. She worked as our housemaid for as long as I can remember. She moved quietly through the rooms, cleaning, cooking, organizing, repairing small broken things before anyone else even noticed them. She wore simple dresses in soft colors, and her dark hair was always tied back neatly. She rarely spoke unless spoken to, and when she did, her voice was gentle and steady. As a child, I barely noticed her presence. She was part of the background, like the ticking clock in the hallway or the curtains that swayed in the afternoon breeze. She would bring me breakfast before school and leave a small folded napkin beside my plate. Sometimes she added a little handwritten note, wishing me luck on an exam. I never asked why she cared. I simply assumed that was her job. My mother never showed much interest in those small details. She preferred charity events, social dinners, and long afternoons at the country club. My father spent most evenings at the office. The house was always clean, always organized, but rarely warm. When I fell and scraped my knee in the garden, it was Maria who rushed outside first. When I cried after a difficult school day, it was Maria who brought warm tea and listened without interrupting. I remember one particular winter evening very clearly. I was 8 years old and terrified of a thunderstorm. The sky flashed violently outside my bedroom window, and the wind shook the trees so hard that shadows danced across my walls. I ran into the hallway, calling for my mother, but her bedroom door was closed. Music played softly inside, and I knew she would not answer. Before I could knock, Maria appeared from the end of the corridor. She wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and guided me back to bed. She sat beside me until the storm passed, humming a soft melody I had never heard before. That melody stayed in my mind for years. I asked her once where she had learned it, and she simply smiled. She told me it was an old song from her childhood. I never asked more questions. I never wondered why her eyes looked distant when she hummed that tune. As I grew older, I began noticing differences between my family and other families. My friends talked about weekend trips with their mothers, shared laughter in kitchens, affectionate embraces after school. My relationship with my mother was polite and structured. She provided everything I needed financially, but our conversations rarely went deeper than school grades and appearance. I told myself that love could look different in every home. Maria remained constant in my life. She attended every school performance, standing quietly in the back row. She clapped the loudest during my piano recital, though she tried not to draw attention. On my 16th birthday, she gave me a small silver bracelet. It was simple and delicate, nothing like the expensive jewelry my parents presented. Yet I wore it every day. When I thanked her, she held my hands slightly longer than necessary. Her eyes filled with something I could not name at the time. Sometimes I caught her watching me in silence. Not in a strange way, but in a careful, protective way. If I laughed, she smiled softly. If I looked sad, her expression darkened. Once, during dinner, my father commented on how much I resembled no one in our extended family. My mother dismissed it as imagination. Maria dropped a glass at that exact moment. The sound shattered through the room like sudden thunder. She apologized repeatedly, though it was clearly an accident. That memory stayed with me long after the glass was cleaned. I began noticing small reactions from her whenever conversations turned to family history. When old photo albums were brought out, she always excused herself quietly. I assumed she felt uncomfortable because she was not part of those memories. I never considered another explanation. During my final year of university, my mother fell ill briefly and spent several weeks traveling for medical treatment. My father was constantly busy, leaving the house earlier than usual. For the first time, the large white house felt empty. Maria filled that emptiness without being asked. She prepared my favorite meals, stayed up late when I studied, and reminded me gently to rest. One night, I asked her why she never married or had children of her own. She paused before answering. She told me life does not always give you what you want. She said sometimes loving someone means letting them go. Her voice trembled slightly, but she quickly composed herself. I thought she was speaking about a lost romance. I did not press further. Looking back now, I realize there were signs everywhere. The way she protected me from harsh words. The way she celebrated my smallest achievements. The way she seemed proud of me in ways my own mother never expressed. Yet I never questioned my identity. I never questioned the structure of my life. Everything appeared stable, logical, predictable. I believed Maria was simply devoted to her work. I believed my family was complete. I believed I knew my own story. I did not understand that sometimes the truth stands quietly beside you for years, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. And when that moment comes, it changes everything you thought you knew about love, sacrifice, and the meaning of belonging. At that time, I still saw Maria as my maid. I had no idea she was so much more. The first crack in my certainty appeared on an ordinary afternoon. Nothing dramatic happened that day. No shouting, no visible conflict. Only a quiet discovery that slowly began to rearrange the shape of my past. My mother had decided to renovate the storage room at the back of the house. She believed old things carried unnecessary weight. She often said the future required space, not memory. I volunteered to help, mostly out of boredom. I had recently returned home after finishing university, unsure of what direction my life would take next. The storage room smelled of dust and forgotten years. Boxes were stacked carefully along the walls, labeled in my mother's precise handwriting. Childhood toys, old financial records, photo albums, decorative items from holidays I barely remembered. I spent hours sorting through papers, separating what would stay from what would be thrown away. Maria moved quietly beside me, organizing fragile objects into smaller containers. She wore gloves, as if she were afraid of leaving fingerprints in the past. At one point, our hands reached for the same small wooden box placed behind a stack of framed photographs. She pulled her hand back immediately. Her reaction felt disproportionate to the moment. I opened the box slowly. Inside were hospital documents, neatly folded and tied together with a thin blue ribbon. The paper looked older than the rest of the items in the room. My name was written clearly across the top of the first page. Isabella Carter. Date of birth. Time of delivery. Hospital location. Everything appeared normal at first glance. Then I noticed something strange. The section labeled Mother had been partially covered with correction ink. The name underneath was barely visible, but not entirely erased. I leaned closer. The letters seemed unfamiliar. They did not match my mother's name. A faint tremor moved through my chest. I turned the page carefully. There were signatures at the bottom. One signature belonged to my father. The other was smudged, but the shape of it looked deliberate, intentional. It did not resemble my mother's elegant handwriting. Maria dropped something behind me. The sound was sharp and sudden. I turned quickly. She stood frozen near the shelves, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. She apologized again, claiming the box had slipped. Her voice sounded strained. I asked her whether she recognized the hospital name. She shook her head too quickly. I felt an unfamiliar sensation rising within me. It was not fear yet, but confusion layered with doubt. I brought the documents into the hallway, where the light was brighter. My heart beat faster as I compared the signatures from the hospital forms to my mother's writing on other papers. They were clearly different. I walked into the kitchen, where my mother was reviewing fabric samples for the renovation. I placed the documents gently on the counter. I asked her why her name was not clearly written on my birth record. She looked at the papers for less than 3 seconds before dismissing my concern. She said hospitals often made clerical mistakes years ago. She said I was overthinking something insignificant. Her tone was calm but distant. She avoided direct eye contact. I pressed further, asking why correction ink had been used. She responded with irritation this time, suggesting that I should focus on my future instead of digging into meaningless technicalities. The conversation ended quickly. She returned to her fabric samples as if nothing had happened. I stood alone in the kitchen, holding documents that suddenly felt heavier than paper should feel. My reflection in the glass cabinet looked unfamiliar. For the first time, I felt disconnected from the identity I had carried so confidently. That evening, I went to my room and examined old photo albums. I searched for hospital pictures, early photographs of my birth, anything that confirmed the narrative I had always known. There were baby pictures, of course, but none from the hospital itself. The earliest image showed my mother holding me at home, already dressed elegantly, already composed. A small detail caught my attention. In that photograph, Maria stood slightly behind my mother. Her eyes were fixed entirely on me, not casually, not professionally. Her gaze carried something deeper. I had seen that expression before, but I had never questioned it. The next morning, I found Maria in the garden trimming roses. The sunlight illuminated her face gently, revealing fine lines of exhaustion I had never noticed. I asked her again about the hospital documents. She paused for a long moment before answering. She said sometimes families have complicated beginnings. She said love is not always defined by biology. Her words felt intentional, too intentional. I asked her directly whether my mother had given birth to me. The question hung between us like fragile glass. Maria's hands tightened around the gardening shears. She whispered that some truths take time. She told me to speak with my father instead. That answer created more questions than it resolved. I had never doubted my parentage before. I had never considered the possibility that my story began differently than I was told. The certainty of my childhood began to shift slowly, like a painting being removed from a wall to reveal something hidden beneath it, Later that evening, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom. I studied my reflection carefully, my features, my eyes, my smile. I searched for resemblance. I tried to see pieces of my mother in my expression. I tried to see my father in the curve of my face. Instead, I saw uncertainty. The first crack in the mirror had appeared, and I could not ignore it anymore. I did not sleep that night. The hospital documents remained on my desk, illuminated by the small lamp beside my bed. The correction ink covering the name felt deliberate, almost desperate. I kept staring at it, convinced that if I looked long enough, the truth would rise clearly to the surface. By morning, I had made a decision. I would go to the hospital listed on the forms. I needed answers that could not be softened by careful voices or polite avoidance. I needed records, facts, something solid beneath my feet. The hospital was older than I expected. Its exterior walls carried the faded color of years gone by. Inside, the air smelled sterile and faintly metallic. I approached the records department with steady hands, though my heartbeat betrayed me. I explained that I needed a certified copy of my birth certificate for personal documentation. The receptionist asked for identification and disappeared into a back office. The wait felt endless. I watched nurses move through the hallway with quiet efficiency. I wondered how many secrets those walls had witnessed. I wondered how many lives had begun there, under complicated circumstances. When the receptionist returned, her expression had changed slightly. She handed me a sealed envelope and asked me to sign a form. Her voice carried professional neutrality, but her eyes studied me briefly, as if she knew something I did not. I walked outside before opening the envelope. The autumn air felt cooler than usual. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the official copy. This time, there was no correction ink, no smudged signatures, no attempts to hide anything. Under the section labeled Mother, a name appeared clearly: Maria Alvarez. The world did not spin dramatically. There was no sudden collapse. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, a silence so deep it felt physical. I read the name again, slowly, carefully, hoping I had misunderstood. The letters remained unchanged. Maria Alvarez. Below the name was her signature, clear, confident, undeniable. My mind began replaying every memory I had with her, every protective glance, every gentle gesture, every late night she stayed awake beside me. Every time she defended me, subtly, from my mother's cold remarks. I understood it all at once. The dropped glass during the family dinner, the tremor in her voice when she spoke about letting someone go, the way she stood in the back row at my performances, not as a worker fulfilling duty, but as someone deeply invested in my existence. She was not simply devoted. She was watching her daughter grow up in someone else's home. I returned to the house slowly. The large white walls no longer felt stable. They felt constructed, carefully arranged. I found Maria in the laundry room, folding clean sheets with precise movements. She looked up when I entered. Something in my face must have revealed everything. I placed the certified document on the table between us. I did not speak immediately. She stared at the paper without touching it. Her shoulders sank slightly, as though she had been carrying invisible weight for decades. I went to the hospital, I said quietly. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Tears gathered in her eyes before she attempted to hide them. She did not deny it. She did not pretend. The silence confirmed what the document had already proven. Why? I asked. though the question felt larger than a single word could contain. Why did she give me away? Why did she stay? Why did she watch from the background instead of claiming her place? She sat down slowly. Her hands trembled in her lap. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady. She told me she had been very young. She told me she had nothing to offer except love, and love alone did not guarantee safety. My father had been her employer at the time. My mother had wanted a child but could not conceive. The arrangement had been presented as an opportunity. I would have education, stability, security, a future beyond poverty. Maria would remain close, able to see me grow, but never publicly recognized. She had agreed, not because she did not love me, but because she loved me more than herself. Each word she spoke felt both comforting and devastating. She described the day I was born. She said she held me first. She said she memorized my face before signing papers that transferred her rights. She said she believed distance would protect me from hardship. I felt anger rising inside me. Not sharp anger, but deep, complicated frustration. I had lived 24 years unaware that my identity was negotiated like a contract. I had been raised to believe privilege was my natural inheritance. Meanwhile, my own mother washed dishes in the same house where I slept safely. "Why did you never tell me?" I asked. She answered that it was not her place. She feared disrupting my life. She feared losing even the small access she had to me. She believed that if I knew, I would be forced to choose between comfort and truth. She did not want that burden for me. Tears slid down her face openly now. She did not wipe them away. I realized something painful in that moment. Sacrifice often looks like abandonment. From a distance, her silence seemed like indifference. In reality, it had been protection. The woman I called my maid had given up her title as mother so I could have a different life. The shock did not explode outward. It settled inward. And nothing about my identity felt simple anymore. The house felt unfamiliar after that conversation. Every hallway carried echoes I had never noticed before. Every framed photograph on the walls now looked staged, like carefully curated evidence supporting a story that was only partially true. I walked through the living room slowly, absorbing the expensive furniture, the polished floors, the chandelier that reflected light like certainty. Nothing had changed physically, yet everything had shifted. Maria remained in the laundry room long after I left her there. I could feel the weight of her confession settling into every corner of the house. For 24 years, she had lived within arm's reach of me, carrying a truth that could have destroyed her position and my stability. That required strength I had never fully understood. I found my father in his office that evening. He was reviewing financial reports, as he often did, maintaining control over numbers that behaved more predictably than people. He looked up when I entered, immediately sensing something serious in my expression. "I went to the hospital," I said without preamble. His posture stiffened. Silence filled the room before he slowly removed his glasses. He did not ask what I discovered. He already knew. "You should have told me," I continued. My voice did not rise, but it carried steady intensity. "Both of you should have told me." He exhaled deeply, leaning back in his chair. He explained that the decision had been complicated. My mother had struggled with infertility for years. Their marriage had been fragile at the time. When Maria became pregnant unexpectedly, Circumstances collided in ways that offered an unusual solution. He insisted that they believed they were doing the right thing. They provided me with education, protection, and opportunity. They ensured Maria could remain close so she would never completely lose me. He framed the arrangement as mutual benefit, but something about that explanation felt incomplete. Did anyone ask what I might have wanted? I asked quietly. He had no answer for that. Later that night, I confronted the woman I had always called Mother. She stood by the window in the dining room, staring into the dark garden. When I told her I knew the truth, she did not react with shock. She reacted with irritation. "This changes nothing," she said firmly. "I raised you." Her words were not entirely wrong. She had raised me. She had provided structure and discipline. She had ensured I attended the best schools. She had introduced me to influential circles. She had shaped the version of me that functioned in society. But motherhood felt larger than management. "You raised me," I replied carefully, "but she gave me life." The sentence hung heavily between us. For the first time, I saw vulnerability beneath her polished exterior. She admitted she had feared losing my affection if I ever discovered the truth. She admitted jealousy had lived quietly within her for years. Watching Maria care for me had sometimes felt unbearable. The arrangement that once seemed practical now revealed emotional fractures in everyone involved. Love had been divided, redirected, restrained. That night, I could not remain inside the house. I walked into the garden, where Maria often spent early mornings tending flowers. She was sitting on the stone bench beneath the old oak tree. The moonlight softened her features, making her appear both fragile and strong at the same time. I sat beside her without speaking. The silence felt different now. It was no longer built on secrets. It was built on recognition. "I do not regret giving you that life," she said softly, "even if it cost me my place beside you." Her voice did not carry self-pity. It carried quiet conviction. I realized then that motherhood could exist without acknowledgement. It could survive without titles. It could endure in the background, sustaining itself on small moments and stolen glances. But I also realized something else. Sacrifice does not erase longing. For years, I had interpreted her distance as professional boundaries. I had misread her restraint as simple duty. In truth, she had been protecting both of us from a reality that might have fractured the delicate balance of the household. "I cannot pretend this does not matter," I said finally. "I cannot unknow what I know." She nodded slowly, understanding that the truth once revealed could not return to silence. The next morning, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. I requested a family meeting in the living room. All three of them sat across from me. The atmosphere was tense, but no one attempted to interrupt. "I will not erase anyone," I began. "You both shaped who I am, but I refuse to let sacrifice remain invisible." I turned toward Maria. "You are my mother." The words felt powerful. Not rebellious, not dramatic, simply accurate. My adoptive mother closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the impact. She did not argue. Perhaps she understood that acknowledgement did not automatically remove her own role. It simply expanded the definition. I proposed something simple yet profound. Maria would no longer be introduced as staff. She would remain in the house if she wished, but not as a servant. As family. Openly. Without pretense. The adjustment would not be easy. Social circles would whisper. Friends might question. appearances would shift. But truth deserved space. Weeks passed slowly after that conversation. Tension did not disappear overnight. Patterns built over decades required patience to unravel. Yet something within me felt grounded for the first time. My identity no longer floated on assumptions. It stood on clarity. I began spending mornings in the garden with Maria, listening to stories about her childhood. I learned about the sacrifices she never spoke of. I learned about the courage it took to remain silent. I also rebuilt my relationship with the woman who raised me, acknowledging her insecurities without allowing them to dictate reality. Motherhood, I discovered, is not owned by biology alone. It is not secured by wealth or appearances. It is defined by presence, by intention, by the willingness to place another life above your own comfort. Sacrifice often looks like abandonment, but sometimes abandonment is the disguise love chooses in order to survive. And now, at last, I understood who I truly was. And before this story fades from your mind, let me ask you something. How many truths are still hidden behind silence? How many sacrifices have we misunderstood as abandonment? If stories like this make you pause, if they make you reflect on your own life, if they stay with you long after the screen goes dark, then this is exactly why this channel exists. I share stories that uncover hidden emotions, untold sacrifices, and the quiet truths families never speak about. Stories that feel personal, stories that make you think, stories that matter. So if you want more journeys like this one, more twists that change everything, and more moments that touch something deep inside you, take a second right now. Subscribe to the channel. Stay with us, because the next story might feel even closer to home.